So thanks for meeting with me today, Tara.
Thanks for having me.
You're a counselling
I
psychologist,
am.
my first counselling psychologist on the podcast. So I think that's going to be really important to unpack. But first of all, I think it would be great to set a scene with how do you spend your time? What does a typical week look like for you at the moment?
My typical week, I love because it's not what used to be my typical psychologist week. So I work across several different kind of areas. So I run a
Hmm.
clinic that I do 2 days a week face to face. I do some of my clients online as well, but I also run a community interest project in my local area. So 2 days a week, I am out doing walk and talk sessions, meeting, training, working with people in the community. And that's predominantly around kind of loneliness and isolation and general kind of low level emotional health issues, getting people connected and moving outside. I also run some wellbeing sessions for people that work in animal welfare, that run animal shelters or do campaigning or anything in that sector. And I also, in my spare time, do a little bit of getting nice information out in the media. So I do a little bit of telly and radio. And sometimes I will collaborate with companies and businesses on something else emotional health related to help either their employees understand or get support, or getting something out in the media to help people understand the relationship a lot of the time between brain and body. So I love talking about human behavior. So yes, so I walk literally several projects, but that's why I love it, because I don't have the same day every day. I kind of wake up and go, what am I doing today?
Yes.
Podcasting as well. I also have my own podcast as well as going on other people's.
Yeah. I mean, I hear all of that and I think, yeah, what a great variety. Is it
I like the
difficult to juggle?
variety, and that also keeps me interested. And I'm really hot on, I don't want to get complacent as a psychologist or stale. So the fact that I work across different things and they've all come up really organically. I haven't decided I want to work in that area, I'm going to do it. They're just opportunities that come my way. And I quite like to see gaps and things and think I could help there, or no one's really looked at that in that way. So I'm a little bit kind of entrepreneurial, which I quite like. And I didn't know that was in me until recently. So for the first 20 years of my career, didn't know that side of me existed. So I love being able to have a little bit of autonomy and independence and bringing psychology into areas and helping it develop and helping people to feel better about themselves and connect with others, really.
I love it. And if we jump backwards through time, what was the initial interest? What made you think that you wanted to be a psychologist?
So I did psychology as a degree. I will be honest, I did psychology as a degree because it only had 6 contact hours. And as a 17-year-old applying for university, 18-year-old, that kind of seemed interesting. My dad was an educational psychologist, and I used to love talking about people and interactions. I've always been really interested. It sounds so cheesy, but I like human behavior. I like to know, why do people do things and why are people not doing things? So I think that's what made me gravitate towards doing a degree. And then when I qualified, I was thinking about being a kind of qualified and regulated practicing psychologist. I was always quite interested in working with adults rather than children or other populations, and I worked in a head injury unit and just fell in love with behavior psychology, the families that were impacted by people with head injury. So it was an acute head injury unit, it was a residential unit, and it just kind of kick-started that I really like the interaction between individuals. So that's why counselling psychology really attracted me. So again, it's quite organic. I didn't go, I would like to be a counselling psychologist and I'm doing A levels and a degree to get there. And I think that's quite nice for people to hear, that sometimes you just find your fit with something because
Yes.
you've got some values or something interests you. And I think that's maybe what's kept me in it, because it's something quite organic and innate
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
keeps me going, I suppose.
And when I was, because we did our degrees at the same time, and I didn't know what counselling psychology was. Clinical psychology was the one that seemed
Yes,
to get all the
absolutely.
limelight.
Yeah.
Do you remember how you became aware of counselling psychology?
Yes. So I was looking at different ways of being kind of a qualified psychologist that's allowed to work one-on-one with people. So I was looking at clinical psychology, counselling psychology. I was a massive fan of, I think now he's Professor Robert Bohr, who'd done a lot of work in aviation psychology, and he ran one of the counselling psychology courses that I was interested in. And one of the things about counselling psychology, that the kind of dominant thing is that relationship with you and the person in front of you is very, very crucial. So counselling psychologists predominantly it's about one-on-one or kind of group relationships. And that's something that really attracted me. It's look at the dynamic. What's the interaction between us? How can we learn? So it kind of crosses over between clinical psychology, psychodynamics, kind of transactional analysis. And I really, really liked that model. And I love the way that it's Linda Papadopoulos as well, who's quite a well-known counselling psychologist. And they were starting off a course together, a new course, and they were quite innovative. And there was something about that, just that one-on-one interaction. So when I qualified, counselling psychology was very different to clinical in that respect, that it's about that dynamic in the room with an individual. So clinical psychologists will maybe do some behavioural observations or something. That wasn't generically part of my training. It's always working with an individual.
Yes.
And I just found it was about fit, really.
Yeah.
The course, I like the people that ran it. And in those days, it was in sections. So you didn't get your doctorate as part of it. You had to do a master's and then what we call the kind of chartership part. And then the doctorate I actually did as a top up a few years later because it wasn't a 3-year program then. So it took me about 5-6 years altogether to do my training, but you could work at the same time.
Yeah. So how did that work? So the master's first?
Yes.
Was that a year, 2 years?
So that was 2 years for my master's. This is like pre-millennium, so I'm that old. But when you were on placements, it wasn't like clinical where you're kind of NHS funded and then you go on placements that are organised and you get a salary. It's purely independently funded, so it's why a lot of people won't go down the counselling psychology route because it's not a funded course in the UK. I don't think it ever will be. So I would work, but some places would pay me at the same time on a trainee rate, which was fantastic. So again, that was quite innovative. So I was the first people I worked in a learning disability service as one of my first placements that I ended up working in as a qualified, and still super good friends with so many people from there 25-26 years later. And they paid me on a trainee salary for my placement days, which was unheard of in those days. So again, it's just those pushing boundaries, going, doing this work, I wonder whether you could consider paying me. And they did, and it was fantastic. So that really helped me to fund my course and be able to live. Because it's finding my feet in different areas as well.
Yeah, no, it's a lot, isn't it, coming out of uni and then taking on more study.
Yeah, I used to do night shifts, so I still worked in the head injury hospital, but it was also a unit that was in a hospital that had a acute mental health wing. It had a complex PTSD unit where people were on 3-month programs. So I was kind of a bit like a kind of a rehab assistant stroke auxiliary nurse, I guess, in those days. So I eventually kind of moved around different sections. So I got so much experience. So that's what paid my rent and paid my fees. But also then I was a trainee kind of psychologist for the placement days that I had. So it was a real hybrid, and it was a real juggle. But I think that's why I quite like that now. So I work across different things, and it worked well.
So you did the masters, and then
so it's called a practitioner diploma. So it's a bit to be chartered in those days. So in the old days, as I say, the BPS courses were kind of part 1 and part 2, and then you were a chartered. That was obviously in the days before the HCPC were invented, so I'm that old. So in those days, the kind of regulatory body was purely the BPS in those days. So your course had to mean you were a chartered psychologist, and then you were allowed to practice in the NHS or in, as a kind of psychologist who's qualified and able to work independently with people.
And do you know, does it work the same way now?
So now all the courses are a 3-year doctorate, kind of all in one, rather than separate. But I think there are still some universities where you can do it in 2 parts still. So the kind of masters, and then so I know some people have done one part at one university, for example, and then the second part at another. So it's still a little bit. There are also less courses now. So counselling psychology has really narrowed down in terms of the number of places offering courses. So I still lecture now at City, who are quite kind of dominant in the field of counselling psychology, and that is a 3-year doctorate.
Yeah. And when you qualified, you worked in the NHS initially.
I worked in the NHS for about 15 years altogether. So I've worked in adult mental health and learning disability, and kind of crossed over between the two. So I've always worked with adults. I've never been that. Again, it's just about finding your fit. So I've always worked with adults with mental health problems, learning disability, autism, but also there was a lot of work around human behaviour in learning disability, which I loved. And actually, now I'm working solely private practice, I use a lot of the principles of human behavior that I learned from doing many, many years when I talk in the media, helping people to understand concepts. So again, it's that kind of hybrid model where you just pick up little things, and it's so useful. It's also quite useful for helping other people understand concepts. So if I do a little bit of telly or radio, rather than talking clinical jargon, I like to kind of break things down into steps of sometimes we'll do this and what's the function of doing it. And if we can learn why, we're in a better position to spot when we do it and maybe alternative solutions. So a lot of that kind of, I guess, old school kind of behaviorism I find really, really useful in my everyday practice now across all of the things that I do.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I remember it did feel for a few years as if behaviourism was kind of dying out, and it was perhaps more relevant in certain populations, like maybe some of the challenging behaviour in learning disability.
Exactly. So that's kind of the
and then I think it changed again, didn't it, with behavioural activation being so good for depression.
Absolutely. So I bring all sorts of elements in, because quite often I'll find, so in my clinic now, I see adults with a range of emotional health issues, but I will see, it's harder to see people with learning disabilities in private practice, just in terms of the kind of funding and the wider support system they need, that you can't manage that just as a sole practitioner in the community. But I do a lot of work around autism and ADHD, but also just helping people to formulate their behaviour and how they get stuck in cycles. So it's really useful to be able to draw on lots of different concepts, because quite often people don't realise what they're doing. We're very quick fix as a society at the moment. So people will quite often come and say, I need to stop being anxious or stop being depressed. But actually quite often they won't notice their behavioural patterns. They won't notice their anger, for example, the kind of function of why it is they're doing this behaviour, or they're retreating, avoiding things. So quite often I like to kind of help them helicopter out. And that's where a lot of the behavioural stuff's so useful.
I can really imagine that. Yeah, so perhaps people that get very in their heads and very analytical about things and maybe actually need to kind of simplify.
And it's easier stuff to then use in situ. So you can have all these wonderful theories, and again, when you've got that competing with the quick fix, I need this gone, I've got to get back to work, or my relationship's suffering because of this anxiety and my avoidance, or whatever it is, people get very stuck on that fix it, and not necessarily able to kind of sit and notice and really understand what makes us psychologists is our ability to formulate. So I find a lot of the behavioural principles really useful, and also spotting things in other people. So if you've got an unhealthy dynamic at work, something a little bit toxic, being able to kind of go, they're doing, what's the function of their behaviour, rather than just going, right, they're making me feel X and Y and I need to stop feeling X and Y. And I just find it helps people therefore better able to spot it, and in other situations as well. So I always think our job as a psychologist isn't just to work with whatever kind of comes through the door, so to speak. It's equipping people with the skills to go, okay, if life throws me other things, this is how I spot what's happening. This is how I spot some of my unhelpful ways of coping. And here's where I may be able to create some change.
I love how enthusiastically you're talking about your work. And I knew from previous conversations that you would do this.
I like what I do. I like it's a little bit like detective work sometimes, isn't it? Psychology. It's kind of just helping people together. Work out what's going on, where do we need to create change. And also that little press pause, and we might not know how to create change just yet, but sometimes actually the biggest intervention is helping people understand what's going on. And that's stuff that I like,
and sometimes it's that taking that pressure off, isn't it? Maybe we can't change it straight away, but we're going to analyze it, we're going to make a bit more sense of it, and trust that then you'll find what you need.
And that's the nature in the very fast-paced life post-pandemic. We've got a huge rise in emotional health issues, cost of living crisis. There's a lot of stuff coming our way. So for a lot of people, there aren't immediate quick fixes. There aren't kind of tangible solutions that are kind of in the old school kind of NHS 6 sessions of CBT, and we're all kind of neatly tied up in a bow and not anxious anymore. We're trying to move, giving people permission to go. There will be days where I might move away from how I want to respond, but it's about noticing and looking at patterns, and often when you introduce that kind of compassionate element, it does put you I think in a better position to create longer term change.
Yes, a lot of the people I work with are so self-critical, and that self-compassion, that gentleness, because often as well the self-criticism, it doesn't help us understand something, we squash something down because it tells us that thing shouldn't be here, doesn't it?
And if we even though play a tiny part in that, fantastic.
Absolutely. So even though you are super enthusiastic, I think it's good to present a really rounded impression. What would be some of the challenges you find in your work?
Oh, so time management, overwhelm, burnout in psychology,
Mm-hmm.
particularly anyone in helping professionals, actually, not just psychology, we give, and we're in receipt of a lot of difficult emotions. We hold a lot of other people's stuff. It's not a job that you close your clinic door or you know, turn off the Zoom and then it's gone. We hold other people's stuff. It swirls around our head on a Saturday. So managing your boundaries around self-care, what you take on, quite often, naturally, a lot of psychologists are givers, so therefore we not necessarily great at recognizing when it's okay to say no. And I know that's something I really struggle with. I've got better, but I'll help with that. And sometimes as well, because you work across different projects, you will get known as but you're usually really good at taking that on or saying yes to things. If you're in, I always think actually, if I just ran a clinic, I might notice that more. But because you're across several projects, I find it harder to notice that I am getting caught up in the helping and the yes, and not going, hang on a minute, I'm doing way more of that. And now I haven't got as much time to give to that project because I've got totally consumed in something. So I have to every now and again just kind of go, right, what am I working on? I actually have I have a little visual map I keep of the different things I work across. And I just every now and again will just have a look at is there anything really dominating that maybe needs to, I run a CIC and sometimes that will ramp up at a bit. I might start something that's a newer thing and that needs a bit more attention, but it's not giving across all domains. And also just, it's the managing other people's expectations of you as well, I find. So it's kind of boundaries around your own time, but also but you've always done this, or you're really great. Can you get on board with this project? If you're known as being innovative and quite good at looking into solutions, you can get invited on things that are really exciting and you go, I want a piece of that. Yes, I want to help. It's being able to go, thanks, that's lovely to think of me, but at the moment I just can't take that on, and being okay doing that.
I think you've talked really nicely there to a couple of different reasons, isn't it? That it's, when we want to help people, it's hard to say no. But also when something sounds really interesting, it's hard to say no.
It's a bit like
really
someone dangling a carrot
and going, no, I just
yes.
can't. There's no gaps.
Absolutely. So kind of looking after yourself. And I guess as well, we're still having lives that we have to give to. So there may be big life changes, and I've had a big life change this year, is just being okay with not doing all the things. I guess that probably sounds a bit cheesy, but I think that's really important. But also managing as well. So a lot of psychology work can end up being quite philanthropic, and historically, so that's actually maybe a useful thing to think about. So if you've had many years in the NHS where there's no transaction between you and your clients, you're salaried. When you step into that world of private practice, you have to make income, you have bills to pay, but you have to have conversations and you have to have boundaries. So if you're someone like me, I run a community interest company. Sometimes we don't take money. I may end up doing things for free, and I'm choosing to do that, but I need to offset it with something else. So it's business skills. That's the things that can be quite hard for psychologists because we're not trained in that. And also quite often we'll go into jobs that are salaried to begin with because it comes with the framework and the supervision. So therefore, when we step into a world where maybe we've got to be in charge of that, it's really hard then. And that can kind of tap into what I was saying before about the boundaries of kind of going, actually, yes, I love doing this work, but I'm working at a loss, or I'm not managing to do the paid. So you have to kind of just keep a baseline of income, having conversations around money, clients that might cancel, all of these things you do have to think about, because it can look on paper like a quite interesting job and you're doing all these things, but behind the scenes, you've got to make sure you've got some really key things in place. And it can be hard to keep an eye on all of that.
Yeah, it's a lot that you're juggling, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know for me, just a few months ago, one of my supervisors asked me how much time I spend working on my business. And I laughed because the answer was none. And that's ridiculous. Clearly, that's not going to work well. So I've started booking in time where I'm reviewing what have I been doing, what's worked well this month, what might my next steps be.
It's a little bit like what we do with some of our one-to-one work, isn't it? That we're going, right, let's come back to the formulation, what's working well in the strategies we're doing, but we don't always do it ourselves. And sometimes as well, when you're doing all the things and you're helping, you can get quite caught up in that. We don't often helicopter out and go, hang on, where am I?
Yeah.
So I think that comes back to business skills as well. So one of my big things about psychologists, and then there's quite a few of us that feel that way, we're not trained in being an owner of a business. It's not part of our training, is it? So when you step outside of anything that's not salaried, where do we learn this stuff? And sometimes there can be shame and guilt, and that's really important to bring in asking, because if you get to your mid-40s and go, I don't know how to do a business model, I've never learned this stuff, I don't know how to kind of get a base, I don't know how to promote myself, it can feel cringy, you know, because we've seen discussions on platforms recently. What are the ethics around advertising? Is that okay to do? You know, is it all right to have conversations around money? Is it okay to put new boundaries in on work you've done for free and say, actually, now I need to be paid for this? So I would say to people, it's just thinking about your business model, your business skills, and being okay asking. It's all right not to know stuff because we're not trained in it.
Yeah, and at its best, I know when I left the NHS, I found it really exciting having to think in a bit more of a business-like way.
Yeah.
Having been qualified for quite a few years, it felt quite invigorating to be thinking a bit differently about what I was doing. But then there's definitely, and I think this is what my supervisor was noticing with this conversation a few months ago, there have also been times where I've just been kind of head down doing the work and not pausing enough to take stock and reflect on, am I doing what I want to be doing?
And I will say as well, so psychology is still very much a female dominated profession. So if you happen to have children and you're working privately, I find I didn't have the time that I thought I would have to kind of I'd get back from clinic or a meeting or running my CRC, but then I've got parenting to do. So that might be the time I go, I really need to just sit and think about this thing or look at this model or go on a course to look at my accounting or whatever it be, is that stuff then has to be offset against family life. So I don't want to be on the computer in the kitchen in the evening when I would like. So it's competing with other values. So I often find it's the business stuff that will just get left, as you say, the how am I doing? What do I need to work on my business? Because the other values of stuff outside of your job, I just find they tend to dominate. So again, that's a bit like that links lovely back to what we were saying before, that sometimes you can get very fixed on the doing and not going, look where that's my area where I tend to avoid a bit. But, okay, I've noticed it. Let's look at how we could do that. As you say, put some time in the diary, or sometimes I'll use my driving time or a dog walk time. I'm quite a big fan of carving time in your walk to think about things. So I'll be like, from this tree to that leisure centre, I'm just going to spend 10 minutes thinking about that project. Do I want it or not? And then the rest of the walk is for me. So I, like you say, little pockets of time.
Yes, I'm going to steal that.
Yeah.
Yes. What's something that people sometimes misunderstand about what you do?
Oh, I'm going to go bold. So when I trained, I was trained in diagnostics. So the medical model was quite dominant back kind of late 90s. And things have moved on a lot. So I'm a big advocate for, what does the person in front of me, what does that client in front of me want? So one of the things that people can misunderstand is that psychologists are people we diagnose, and we use the word depression, and it's all about labels and diagnostics. And actually things have moved on a lot. So some people will say, you know, can I come and see you and can you diagnose me with depression? I actually now think very differently about that. So I'm a very formulation-based person. And if somebody finds it useful to go and look at kind of diagnostic criteria, and that's helpful, absolutely fantastic. But I still think people they have certain expectations that we are very medicalized still. And I think with the word clinical psychology, particularly, that word's quite loaded as well, isn't it? So kind of that hybrid model now of formulating someone. Yes, we have diagnostics, which I think can be very helpful for certain populations, but that we are not, you know, it's not about that label. It's about understanding human and the human condition. And that's something I still kind of find now, you know, that sometimes people think we are psychiatrists, that we prescribe medicine, and that's what we're about. And I think I struggle with that sometimes because I work on projects that are slightly outside of what I was trained as a psychologist to do. You know, we're not in a therapy room. So sometimes then people are kind of thinking, well, how does a psychologist help with that? Why would they need a psychologist with that? So we're kind of just helping people understand that our job is to help people understand what's going on in a situation. And that could be anything. So, you know, that's where the innovation comes in, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm curious, I don't know, I'm sort of making a link. I've jumped back to the Walk and Talk project. I guess maybe I'm sort of anticipating your answer there, but thinking about what psychology skills you're bringing in there, would that again be a lot around that understanding?
Yeah, I've been met with a lot of misunderstanding that that's not proper psychology. I'm going to throw that out there. So sometimes when I've spoken about it in certain forums, or I did a keynote speech for an organization once, and people kind of said, that's not psychology. It's not what psychologists should be doing. So again, that's that kind of misconception. So what I find is that I started that project up initially on my own, and now I collaborate with my incredible business partner to tackle loneliness and isolation after the pandemic, and people that are really unsure about leaving their homes, so to kind of connect again, but safely, and to provide a framework. So we have safeguarding policies, we have to have risk assessments, everything that is core of my job, helping someone kind of understand barriers to them connecting with others and getting out in the community. So it's basically, it's formulation meets innovation. So we just, part of what we do are walk and talk sessions. It's not therapy, so they don't come to meet a psychologist. It's about supporting people to connect together. So I guess what I quite like is preventative well-being. So the idea is that you are understanding the connection between your mind and body. That's a huge part of it. When I'm moving and connecting with others in nature, what changes that creates in the brain, how that affects your emotional health and your physical health. So there's so many elements of my training and my background that form part of that project in terms of how I help people manage their emotional, physical health, but also the policies and procedures and the behind the scenes stuff that people never realize is there, is all part of psychology training.
Yeah, I'm just going to move my curtain across a minute.
The sun's out, which is
The
really
sun's
lovely,
out,
isn't it?
and it's a
been
shame
so
to shut it
miserable
out.
lately. So yeah, people, but it's that again, just showing people that we might have quite a rigid view that psychology is sitting in a room and working with an individual or a group, and actually psychology is basically the science of mind and behavior, isn't it? That's what it is. So what we do is always very evidence-based, but it can be innovative in so many ways.
Yeah.
But the idea is I like to help empower people to understand their own well-being. When I qualified, there was still a little bit of a kind of an expectation that you go to experts for things and they fix the problem or fix you, even that language used to be around, rather than how can we empower people to go, what's happening in my mind and my body, and why is it that then I'm struggling with something? And then what I find with our walk and talk groups, which are just hidden outcomes I didn't even expect, is then people are then taking new members that come along under their wing and going, when I first started, I was really nervous and I walked at the back. And so they're using what they've learned. And do you know, I've noticed that my mobility is better, or I'm a little bit better at going out in the community on my own since I've come here. And does that, so you're kind of empowering people, A, to understand themselves, but also then to pass that on to other people.
That's so nice.
Like unexpected but fantastic outcomes.
Yeah.
And it's so nice to see. So that keeps us, we love running it because it's actually just as good for our well-being. So I have a team of volunteers as well as my business partner, and we love it. We absolutely love running it because we get to meet incredible people and have conversations, people across the lifespan, men and women, which is fantastic.
Yeah. And how did you get funding for that?
So we predominantly, for the last few years, we just do it off our own back. So to begin with, it was just an informal community group that we just paid ourselves to. People don't pay to go, and it's free for people to attend. And now we apply for grants for things like, we have t-shirts and rucksacks, but we also do well-being training and things that we charge for, but predominantly we don't take money from it. So that comes back to that business model of it's just with a social enterprise, any profits you make go back into your project and the community anyway. So it is something again, it's that kind of deciding, can I do this? In those early days, we just financed it ourselves because it's something we wanted to do for the community. It wasn't a huge expense, but it just shows you it doesn't have to be. You know,
it doesn't have to be.
So innovative with how we did it, and
I like that model around kind of partial funding, because I think so often if we wait for funding, like that's a real barrier to doing something, isn't it? And I think sometimes having something up and running, if we're financing it, but then we're showing, look, people are coming, this is really valuable.
I'm a massive
That's got to be a really good argument then in getting the funding.
Absolutely. I follow, so Stephen Bartlett on one of his original kind of early days of his podcast has said so many people will wait for this perfect model, because again, it's kind of anxiety driven. You know, if you come as a psychologist from the NHS, salaried, you know, you had this guaranteed income. It's fearful when you're stepping out and not having that. So sometimes what can happen for a lot of people in business as well is that they will just wait for this all singing or dancing model before they start. And he's always, and that's what kind of inspired me, is that as long as it's safe, so I had policies and procedures in place, risk assessments, public liability for people walking around a park, and we just develop as we go. And we've tried some things and they haven't worked so well. We've expanded the walks, that didn't work. We've had 2 key ones that work well. So it's that hybrid model. Try as you go, refine as you go. And there's a psychologist, as long as you've got your ethical roots, you've got your evidence base, and you've got your risk assessments and your safety. Those are my little triad of things. We try stuff. And we go. And also that not getting caught up in the have to do it all in a certain time frame, have to have so many followers. My business partner Shirley and I, we don't care what anyone else is doing, and that's why our business works and succeeds, because it's really small, but it just grows, but it's really solid, if that makes sense. Because a lot of CICs will fail in the first 2 years, because some people get very caught up in this is how it must look, and people will think we're not doing well if we don't look like this or have that many people and walks. To us, it makes no difference if one person comes or 20. So some Wednesdays we'll have 20, some will have a couple. It doesn't make any difference. We do it because those people that come get that.
Yeah.
It's about coming back. I do a lot of acceptance and commitment therapy with my clinic, but I also live it. So for me, it's about the value of what I do, and that really helps you not get caught up in the should do's and the must do's and how does it look for everyone else. So in a non-clinical way, we don't care how many followers we have. It's not about that for us. I wear polo shirts walking around the park, and some people say, is that what a psychologist does? Absolutely. It's my favorite day of the week, Wednesday. I walk around in my hoodie, my branded hoodie and my polo shirt, and I am probably at the happiest of anything I do all week when I'm doing that. And not getting paid for that.
And I like that you're separating. There's no ego in there as well, so that when you're getting that criticism, and I feel so sorry that you've got that, and it feels so kind of naive and ill-informed. But it's that coming back to values, I'm sure, that, okay, so you might not get this, but this is why I get this. This is why I'm doing it.
And do you know what I've really done as well? So my business partner has a really different background to me. So she's a mindfulness coach. She has lived the experience of certain emotional health presentations, and we work really well. So one thing I've learned, and it's really humbled me, is because I came up with a concept and I'm a psychologist, I can get quite rigid with but this is how I've always done things and this is how I'm trained and I work, is that wonderful relationship over 4 years of, but what if we did it that way? And and both directions, it just works really well. And some of the volunteers that work with me have backgrounds and they help with stuff and have ideas and they go, oh my goodness, is that how that works? So that's what I learned. So it's CPD for me.
Yeah.
Because you can kind of get to a point in your career where you're like, oh, I kind of know what I'm doing now. And it's really good to be pushed into people to go, why are we doing it that way? Or that's not working. We need to look at it this way. So that's what I really love as well. That I learn and I evolve and that we get stuff wrong and we revise. I think that's quite humbling to go, oh, that didn't quite work. Or, oh, we didn't get that grant. I didn't quite get the lingo right. I've got to learn how to do this stuff. And all the times I've spent 2 hours filling in a grant form when they're live, you can't save them. And then my computer's crashed and I've gone, okay, right, that's a learning curve. Save the stuff in Word and export it in. So I think that's quite humbling for people to hear that, you'd think that would be really obvious to a psychologist with a certain level of education, but no. We stand in stalls in the rain trying to publicise what we do, and our gazebo's literally flooding, and we do it and we love it. It's that, don't be afraid to get wet, to get soggy, to get stuff wrong, and don't sit on an idea. Just try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I always say that lovely ACT question, the kind of end of life, what do you want to look back and say, I'm glad I tried, or I'm glad I didn't, or and sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm glad I tried. And the very first walk and talk session I did, so this is probably quite nice for people to hear, I turned up with a book in case no one came, because I didn't want to look like I was standing there and no one liked my idea. So I thought if I take a book, I could just pretend I've gone to the park to read. And people came, and it's just that, and I always think that's quite a nice example that even as a psychologist we have that kind of fear and shame of everyone's going to think my idea is rubbish, no one's going to turn up, and I've already advertised it, and then people are going to ask me how did it go, and I was like, no one came, but there we are. So I turned up with my book, with my safety behaviour.
And of course in ACT, we'd look at how our minds get hooked, wouldn't we? We'd see that as a trap that we fall into. I'm going to try and rein you in a little bit, because I could talk to you all day, but I know that you need to get on with it. We could talk all day, couldn't we? I want to ask you 2 more questions. So the first one is, you mentioned the animal welfare sort of the wellbeing sessions for animal welfare staff. And because that's unusual, I'm thinking it would be good to just hear just a couple of minutes about how that came about, why that's important.
It's such a simple thing, but it also leads really nicely off what we said, that it is so different. It is something you might have just gone, no way, I can't do that, or I can't do it on my own. So I got asked by a well-known vet and campaigner to just meet and have a discussion about a kind of a hidden emotional health crisis, basically, and people running rescue centres, especially post-COVID, with animal rescue, people that, rehome dogs, cats, other pets, who are just inundated, overwhelmed, compassion fatigue. It's a kind of a hidden thing. Most people don't really realize what animal rescues deal with, in terms of what they see, the conditions they're rescuing animals from, people who are having to give up their pets for cost of living crisis, and then having the trauma of handing it over because they cannot afford to keep that animal. So these people are absorbing so much, and people have started to notice, but no one had ever really looked at it. So it was it was one of those conversations where originally I was like, oh, I'll have one lunch or a couple of meetings and help people think about it. And then 2 years later, I run sessions. So I do all of that philanthropically, bar a couple of bigger organizations where they've offered me a fee just to do a one-off thing. So I've done basically a mapping exercise. So I've immersed myself in this world. I go to some parliamentary meetings and real grassroots. What are the issues? What do you need? Because what can sometimes happen, and I think that's really important for people thinking about a career in psychology, is that there can be this, I'm a mental health professional, I'll come in, I know what you need. So we'll do some stuff on stress, anxiety, that we might use our own bias. This is very different. I went in, I did a survey, I've spent time with people. So over 2 years learning. That's why I found hidden stuff. The compassion fatigue, people didn't even know what it was. Vicarious trauma. People are thinking they're just stressed and overwhelmed, because that's what social media's the kind of buzzword at the moment, is all burnout. So it's all of the kind of cognitive bias stuff, and grief. So over 2 years, I've kind of developed a model. I run sessions for people online. I now work with 17. I added them up the other day. I work with 17 different rescue organizations, where I kind of have a little bit more of a look at what they need. And sometimes it's just 1 or 2 sessions. Sometimes it's kind of debrief work, and it's a real hybrid. I do talks and things, and that's a purely organic. It evolves as it goes, but it's a really lovely example of, I can't do this on my own. It's terrifying. What if people don't think it's proper psychology? So again, it comes back to that. If it's safe, you've got risk assessments, you're really clear on your boundaries, you're clear of your academic roots and the research and what you're providing, try. And I try and refine, and some things work, some things don't. And one rescue needs something very different to another, which then proves the overall theory of, don't just go in with, let's just talk to all of them about stress and overwhelm. And I've developed the most incredible relationships and friendships from it, which is that's what keeps me in it as well. So it's not just a job for me that I leave and come home from. It's a world, and actually has also become one of my favorite things to do.
And there must be so many of those worlds, mustn't there, where people are struggling, and
that's what I love.
No one's noticed or known quite what to do with it.
Go and be. I will use that word. It's being brave and going, that means something to me, and I can see how those people are struggling. But because it's new and no one's done it, that bias sometimes in psychology could be, I can't take that on, or it mustn't work because no one's done it before. That's quite an interesting bias, isn't it? That when we look at an area and go, well, surely someone must have looked at this before, and there must be a reason why. And I'll be honest, when I first got asked about the animal welfare, I was like, surely people, rescue centres must have gone to professional and looked at this. But sometimes it's not that way, and we can go in and have a little look, and sometimes I get it right, sometimes I don't. There are things I can't take on, it's just me, and that's okay. It's just I'm doing what I can. But that again is a bit like my CSE. It's the chipping away small and slowly. I wasn't known in that sector. People won't answer my emails and then they'll meet you, have a conversation, and kind of go, okay, I get this now. So it's you have to really persevere. And that's the thing I think maybe is helpful for people. Perseverance is so important in psychology, I think.
So linked with that, this is my last question, because I know we're almost there time-wise. What would be your top tips for students interested in becoming psychologists?
Do you know what? I think sounds really cheesy, but it's being authentically you and going with what your values are. Why do I want to think about a career in this sector? And I would say sector rather than as a clinical psychologist, as a counselling psychologist, because sometimes you can get these very rigid views on the only way to do psychology is to be disqualified. But there's so many different careers in psychology now, so many different new terms, because it's become quite hybrid. So it's going, why do I want to work in this sector? What's attracting me? So a little bit like with me, it's that one-on-one relationship. I love humans. I like being around them and finding them really interesting. And that kind of set me on my path rather than that more kind of top down. I guess that's cognitive bias stuff. In order to be a psychologist, it has to be this kind and I have to do this training route. It's that kind of be authentically you, know what your values are, but also just be prepared to revise and pivot, as we say. You know, it might be that you start out, you apply for training for a few years to be a clinical counselling psychologist, you don't get on and go, what's the point? Someone I know recently has then ended up in a different type of psychological career that's actually their fit. So the rejections from the training, which was all consuming in this kind of baseline, is actually a good thing to have happened because that's where they found their fit.
Oh, I love that.
I think that's really important for people to know because I think there's a lot of pressure to do things in a certain way.
Yeah.
Don't have to.
I'm gonna thank you there for your time. I think that's a really nice note to finish on. Let me come on, iPad. Give me the option to stop the recording. Oh, there we go.